Okay, we are in action. Let me just turn this on. Good morning, Amsterdam! Woohoo! Hands up, whose first in-person conference it is ever? Oh my God, welcome to real life. Okay, we're going to speak about component-driven repos for a component-driven world. What the hell is that about? Great question. Okay, let's take a look. So yes, my name is Debbie O'Brien. I recently used to rock the React stage. No, this is my first React. So yeah, I used to do all the Vue conferences, and then like COVID happened, and I turned to React. That's what happens, right? But yes, I'm an open source contributor, speaker, teacher, blogger, YouTuber, and as he said, I'm always doing sport. Sport is important. Don't just do tech. Sport is really cool. So make sure you always do sport. And yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, Debs_O'Brien. So let's get started. The modern web is component-driven, right? We're all building components. Who is not building components? Who's stuck in like PHP land and all that horrible stuff? Okay, one person, that's great, cool. So let's go. We are living in a perfect world, like we are, there's no masks on anymore. This is pretty perfect. So what do we need to do? Life is good, right? But are we actually living in a perfect world? Well, pretty much this is like building apps now in 2022, right? We are scaling, we need to do more, we're taking on more developers, and nobody really knows what they're doing. They're just building as many features as possible and shipping it as fast as possible, and it can be a little bit of a disaster. So let's go back in time a little, and let's understand where it all started. So yes, it all started with monoliths. We used to build all our code, all stuck together. I'm going to ask a question here. Who here has never built an application with jQuery? Oh my God, lucky yous. Okay, so yeah, we used to build with jQuery and PHP and CSS and HTML and all that stuck in there together, and it was an absolute nightmare. It was a whole monolith, all composed into one big massive piece, right? And I know some of you probably still have code bases like that, and I feel so bad for you. One day, you will get into the real world. But yeah, we basically, we changed things. We got front end and we got back end. We got the back end out of our front end, and we were able to do our own thing. So this is cool, separation. I love the back end, but I like them separate. And then the back end got all clever on us, and they started building microservices. And they were like, look what we're doing. And we're like, okay. So the back end then looked like this, little pieces. And the front end all is this big, massive monolith still. Now, microservices, what are microservices? I'm not a backend, so I'm going to tell you what it is, but if you're a backend, don't correct me. But yeah, arranges the application as a loosely coupled services. It's split in terms of responsibility and knowledge, incremental updates, independent deployments. They got smaller code bases and better scalability. The backend are doing it all right. Oh my God, what are we doing wrong in the front end? The front end is still a monolith. But we're building in React, right? And we're building all modern, so what are we doing wrong? I mean, this is, a React conference. Most of you are building in React, so what's happening here? Well, your components are basically all tightly coupled inside your application. You're building an app, and you put all your components right there inside your application. Who does this? Yes? Yeah, I mean, that's what we do. That's normal. You build your app, and you have your components in there. But that creates problems, because that's a front-end monolith. There's one code base. There's no team ownership. There's one version. There's too many components, and it's hard to scale. There's one build, and it's pretty slow to develop. What happens when you need to scale to multiple apps? All of a sudden, the company says, hey, we're branching out. We've got a new whatever. And now all your components that are stuck in that React application, you're like, oh, what do I do? How do I get it into the other application? You got 3 applications look very similar. What do? You just duplicate the components, don't you? Yeah. I mean, we all do that. I do that. I've done that. And then you got 25 buttons across so many applications, and then it's like a nightmare. Why did the designers change things? Come on. Yeah, lots of code to maintain, and inconsistency. This is the biggest problem of large-scale enterprises today. And then we're like reinventing the wheel, because we're building that same component again and again and again and again. And updating the component over multiple apps is just a nightmare, absolute nightmare. So you go, right, let's just create packages. Let's package all our components, stick it up into NPM. And then we've got all these packages to maintain. And we've got a lot of packages, JSONs to maintain. And there are some, really cool tools out there that make it easier, but Still a lot of package JSONs to maintain. Updating dependencies is now an absolute nightmare. And it's really hard to discover components. I don't know if you've ever put like, oh, components on NPM and tried to find your components. It's a nightmare. I have them up there. I don't even know where they are. So yes, people went to monorepos. This is the solution. I know what I'm doing here. So monorepos are pretty cool. Anyone working with monorepos? Yeah, quite a few. If you keep your hands up if you like working with monorepos. Okay, not too many. Okay, cool. So monorepos are not actually that bad. I mean, it improves speed. It's quite fast to build. You can, share code really easily, right? Because it's all in that one code base. You can have like 6 applications in the one code base and just reuse the components. It's pretty good. Dev experience, pretty good. You have everything you need. Large-scale refactoring, if you need to do it, it's pretty easy to do. So, it's cross-team collaboration is great. You're all working on the same code base with all over different applications. It works. And you have the same standardization because you've only got one ESLint config file, for example. But there are bad things, like in life. There's always the good and there's always the bad. The tooling for monorepos isn't really there, and there are, like I say, there's some great. Lerna tried to do a great job there. NX as well are doing great things there with monorepos, but the tooling is still not fully there for monorepos. Visibility and discoverability, again, it's hard to, and it's kind of like I had this in the con and now in the pro and now in the con, but trying to find components over a monorepo, it can be quite difficult. Yes, you can search through VS Code and stuff, but it's still quite hard to actually really visualize and see them. And it's easy to break other people's code, right? Because, it's all just there. It's all like everyone's code. And onboarding developers is quite hard. We're taking on a lot of new developers in, and then we're just throwing them into this massive code base of like, oh my God, they're like, where do I start? So you got slow builds as well, because you've got so much kind of going on. And then you've got no team boundaries and ownership. And okay, you can say like in GitHub, you can put like ownership on kind of a certain area, but it's not really a boundary. So I asked Twitter, because, tech Twitter has all the answers. What do you love or hate about monorepos? And these are the answers I got. So Gareth here, he said, I only have experience in one, but we managed to end up in a situation where every consuming repo has to import every package in the monorepo. So we have the crappy tooling and the bloat of the monorepo and none of the claimed benefits. Sorry, Gareth. Oliver said, huge fan of monorepos, but the tooling hasn't helped. Solutions like Lerna were hamstrung by NPM clients' limitations. And Brandon, who's an NX developer, said he loves the shared code between apps and libraries, visibility, collaboration, consistency, ability to standardize, single package versions, but he hates the insufficient tooling, which makes the experience bad and can lead to bloated CI time and lots of ad hoc scripts. So basically, this is the problem, crappy tooling. Okay, so what do? We're going to scale our one application. If we have one large application, we're going to scale. This is what it's looking like. We're hard to discover components, as I said. It's hard to give teams ownership. We've got one main branch. We've got no internal versioning. We've got one long build time, and we've got to manage multiple deployments. So what do? Anyone got the answer? No, that's why you're here. Good. Okay, so let's break down the front-end monolith once and for all. This is what we're going to do. How are we going to do this? So you need to let teams own features. Right? If you let teams own features, this is mine, this is yours, we all live happily ever after. So for example, you could have a support team, and the support team might create the support request component. They own that component, which is a form. The online chat widget, that's a component, which is a widget, that's theirs. The My Open support tickets component, which is a page component, they own that. And they might own the dashboard, that's their component. They own that. The product team, they will own the shopping cart component, for example. The get product component, which is a hook. They will own the product card component, the product page component, and then the design team will own the button component, the card component. That's a simple layout of just like, the box shadow, the logo component, the tooltip component. And now we've got 3 teams owning completely 3 different areas of that website. The support team will actually then have their components go and live in the support scope. The product team, their components live in the product scope. And the design team, their components live in the design scope. Now we have 3 different scopes, 3 different clouds. So what's a scope, you say? So a scope is like a next-gen microservice allowing teams to own and expose APIs that include both front-end APIs, back-end APIs, and even node modules. I know, kind of sounds cool. let me show you. So basically, we have an application here. These are like just a list of, scopes. And this is like my base UI scope. This is my e-commerce scope. And this is my shoe store scope. So I built a shoe store based off components separated across different scopes or different repos, for example. Every scope can have its own repo. So you basically put your components in a repo, and then you build an application taking components from each repo owned by whichever team owns them. So it kind of looks something like this, and you can kind of click and see, right, this is who I depend on. These are my dependents. And you can see like each kind of repo, each scope, who is like using who and who's depending on who and who has its dependencies, etc. So let's go back to teams, right? We have our teams. Teams want to own features. They want to work independent from other teams. They want to like finish on a Friday and go home, and who cares that the other team are struggling? They want to have separate build pipelines. They want to build their component and just like build it and send it to production. And they want to test independently. And they want to ship their components individually. And they want autonomy. Teams want autonomy at the end of the day. We all do, don't we? So apps are composed from components, right? When we're building applications, we're composing components together to build our applications. And this is like my shoe store, which like is quite a lot of components are used to make up that e-commerce shoe store that I built. And this is the dependency graph of all the components that are used to build this store. So this is my beautiful store. I'm amazing. Look at it. It's cool. You can go buy shoes, only you can't actually pay for them because I didn't, put that in yet. But yes, the shoe store is made up of components from different repos. So the logo, for example, is coming from the base repo. The product card, the shoe product card there is coming from e-commerce, and the hero is coming from the shoe store because it's specific to, that team, for example. So component-driven is a reuse-based approach to defining, implementing, and composing loosely coupled independent components into systems. So we're trying to build component-driven here. This is what the idea is. So if we take the shoes card, for example, we have this product card, and it's basically built of a card component. This card component is solely responsible for the box shadow. The heading component, it's responsible for deciding, are you H1, H2, H3? The text component is just going to render some text. The image component is going to get the source and the alt, and maybe lazy loading, for example. The button component is responsible for being a primary button, a secondary button, and what its functionality is, and the currency, are we in dollars, are we in euros, etc. So we can actually visualize how everything is built up, and you can see as I'm like hovering over here, you can see that each one is actually an independent component with its own version that's then consumed by this e-commerce store, and everything is just composed together. And we can see at all times where it's coming from, who's using it, what version it's running. So the shoes card, for example, this is the dependency graph for it, and you can see the components that are used to make it up and the version numbers associated with it and the scope or repo that it's coming from. So this one comes from the base, this one comes from the shoe store, and this one comes from the e-commerce. So how do we build component-driven? We've got to think about every component as a product for anyone to use. That's really important, right? You're building a product. Every time you build a component, it's a product. It's an open source product that somebody is going to use in the future, maybe your future self or maybe another developer that's going to come onto the team. So your component should have a great developer experience. You should be able to build it with different contexts. It should be very easy to use. It should have a great API, and it should be loosely coupled. I say loosely because I'd like to say never coupled to anything, but sometimes you have to couple things. So loosely coupled. And if we do that, we are going to have developers who are going to write better software. And we all want to write better software, don't we? And that's going to make us really happy, and we like being happy. And we're going to have more maintainable software because you're going to be able to maintain that better, and you're going to enjoy maintaining it. You're going to have more testable software. You're going to have a better dev experience. And organizations, what are they going to get? Well, organizations are going to get better software, because if the devs are writing better software, organizations are going to end up with your code when you move on to another company. That beautiful code stays with that company, and they're basically going to save a lot of time, and time is very important. They're going to save a lot of money, and they care a lot about money, so that's also very cool. And they're going to have happier devs, and that's even more important because, we're changing jobs every year. So, the company, if they have happier devs, they might just stay in the company, which is very important. So, component-driven is basically where our components are themable, composable, encapsulated, independent, and reusable. Let me kind of go into a little bit more detail. Themable, I mean, we all know, right? You should theme your components, design components with themes so they can be used differently in other applications. Obviously using CSS variables, for example, using Sass, using whatever you want to use, but don't just put hard-coded values in there, because then now you can't theme that component in the future. So when you're building a product card, for example, this is the same product card with literally just a change in the theme, and the CSS variables I'm using are just changed, and all of a sudden I've got two different types of product cards. Really simple thing, but thinking always about scalability really, really helps. Composable, obviously your components should be composable. You want to compose smaller components together to form more complex components. You want to always build as small as possible and have it like what that component have one responsibility and then just be used and composed together to build a better, bigger component. So your product card then is made up of all these smaller components. Would you say, oh my God, that's a lot of work, that's going to take a lot of time? Yes, it is at the start, but it's going to save you in the long run, trust me. You want your components to be encapsulated, so it exposes the interface, which allow the user, the caller, to use its functionality and hide the details of internal variables or state. So basically then you're just going to use props to basically, add into that product card component what it has available to it. And components should be independent, very important. If components are independent, they have their own version, their own revision history, they're like their own application in itself. They have their own build pipeline and minimal dependencies on other components. And that's how you want to start building your components, like one package, one application, one product. And yeah, you can see here the components that I'm using, and they have the version numbers next to them, version 1.011, version 2.03 for the button, etc. And of course, you want your components to be reusable, because if they're not reusable, why are we just building all this code that's just going to have like so much code? You want to be able to reuse it so that someone else can use it, you can use it in the same application, other applications, etc. Reused in different scenarios makes it much better. So the button component is used in the product card, the button component is used in the hero component, and throughout the application, that one component is used multiple times. When I want to update that component, I update it once, and then it's like updated across many places. And you might, like, especially the younger developers who have never had to work on horrible code bases might say, but this all is like common sense, right? But those of you who've had to work on terrible, big, massive code bases, I'm telling you, I've seen companies that has taken 6 months to change the logo across all their applications. So seriously, yeah, buttons, I'm telling you, I worked in a project that had 32 buttons. It's a disaster. So yeah, this is my button component, right? And when you're building your components, you really want to create a component that is very easy for developers to understand, to see, write good documentation. Documentation is important. We all hate it, I know, but just do it. You want to have your designs right there. So I've got a Figma design right here in my component so I can see it. I want to build compositions so I can see how my button would look at different states. And my API, what properties are available to me. So as a developer, I know, do I want to use this component? Is this good enough for my use case? And if you create like fun live playgrounds, for example, it makes it even better, because then the developer can come along, remove that, see what it would look like without that disabled. This is the primary one as a link. If I remove the link and just have it as a primary button, does it look the same? What if I change it to secondary? What's that going to look like? And I can just play around with the code and say, yes, I like this component. Let's have a look at the compositions. So this is what it looks like in every single state. So I can really see, yep, this button does exactly what I want to. This is great. And then, very important, tests. You should be all writing tests. Are you all writing tests? No. Oh, my God. Yeah. So you should be all writing tests. Dependencies, I can see what dependencies, and I can see the code, very important. The developers can look at my code and say, yes, her code is good. She is writing good code. I do trust this component, and I do want to use this component. Very, very important to see the code. And you can see the change log, so you can go back in time at every single version of the component. And I created a lot of versions, so don't look at my versions. But yeah, the first version, you're going to see my amazing designs when I first started out building this e-commerce demo. And the documentation was pretty good, but the design is terrible. So you come along, and maybe you're using that first version that's on that design, and you don't want to use version 2 until the new design has been, done on every other single component. So you can actually just install version 1, or you could go along to version 2, which is much more beautiful, and use version 2. So at all times, you're in control of which version of the component is in your application. How do you use the component? You can use it, I work at Bit, so you can use it with Bit, but you could also just use it with NPM or with Yarn, and this is a little bit old because we just have PNPM support as well. But basically, you just copy it and then install it like you would do any other third-party library. So you're actually just installing a component. Could be just one component, could be every component, but you're just taking a component and literally just installing it into your application. So that means you're creating an application like a shoe store where everything is decoupled. Everything is now separate. It's not inside the application, and it's just being installed into your application, and then you're easily able to build more. Everything has its own repo. You can decide how you want to structure your components into what repos, etc. And then you can decide, because some of you like monorepos, so you can go, I still want to work in a monorepo. That's totally cool. You can still do that. You can build your repos however you want. You could have multi-repos where I had like the components in separate repos and then all the stores in one repo. You can just have completely decoupled code bases. You get to choose how you want to work, and that's kind of cool because, you know, we all want to just do what we want to do. So yeah, this is basically our component scopes here, and I've got like a base UI scope, and I've got movies one for the movie project, and everything is just in a scope, and you can literally then come along and easily search for the component you're looking for, easily search inside the e-commerce, do I have a currency component, do I have this, etc. So we compose components to create apps. That's basically what we're doing. We all want to build applications, and we just want to be able to easily just compose components and build apps. And if we do that, then we can just build so many. So this is the shoe store, my amazing shoe store. And you can see here, I'm going to just show you the composition with the component highlighter so I can see how it's built up. And we had a look at this with the product card earlier, but this is showing you, this is where the logo is coming from, this is where each component comes from, and we can highlight over it so a product manager can come along and highlight over and see where it's coming from as well. Are they using the right component, the right version? If something is going wrong, you can easily see, oh, I can see why that's not okay, that design isn't right because you're using version 1 and not version 2, etc., etc. So this is kind of like a really cool tool. So yes, you want to reuse components in any app. That's basically what we want to do today. Because if you do that, you can build a shoe store, and then look what I did. I built a headphone store, and then I went on and I built a perfume store, and then I built a sports shoe store. So yeah, you can just build as many stores as possible, because all you're doing is just composing components that are already being built and changing the theme, and then bang, you've got like, yeah, more applications. And everything is decoupled, so you've got everything in GitHub as however you want to create those repos. The components live in their repos. And that's basically what component-driven is, right? Component-driven is where components are truly isolated. They're no longer built inside the application. They're completely isolated. They have their own life. They're scoped to a particular team, so you can own this component, you can own that component, you can own a different component, and they're independently versioned. So when you want to update that button component, you update the button, and you don't care about anyone else, you're updating that button. Now you might say, I'm going to break everyone else, but you're not, because if you have the product card that's using a button component, you don't have to accept that update, right? If you don't want to go to version 3, you don't go to version 3. If somebody deletes that component, don't worry, because inside your node modules of that product card component is a carbon copy of that button component. So even if that component gets deleted, it doesn't matter. It still has a reference to everything, and it's still running and functioning, so you never actually break someone. That's really important, because I've broke lots of people's code in the past. Don't tell anyone. And yes, you want your components to be independently released. You want to be able to just release your component, do your job, and go home, because we're all working on different timelines. We don't want to be waiting for other people in a different time zone to be able to finish what they're doing, to be able to then release your components. You want to release it when it is ready. And then components, and that is what we are here for. So thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Thank you, Debbie.
This is a demo project. If anyone does want to scan it, it will take you right to that site, and you can play around it and see all the kind of cool stuff that we're doing with the shoe store with independent components. And do play around with it. If you have any questions, you can always find me on Twitter. My DMs are always open. Excited to hear what you think of it. Thank you very much again. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Very much.